We'll move on to our next speaker. Toby Green is co-founder of Coherent Digital. He's a longtime member of our community and often has incredibly insightful thoughts and opinions about the scholarly communications landscape. So I'm very interested to hear him talk about building and launching the Commons. Toby, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll try and share my screen. Okay, is that okay? Everyone see that?
Yes, looks great.
Right. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Yes, we're building a Commons, and we're building it because the scholarly record has a far side, and that's really what I'd like to talk about today. The scope of today's conference talks about making the entire research process more transparent and the results more accessible. And it also talks about preserving the scholarly record. And this got me thinking about, well, how large is the entire research process? What is it? Where is its edges? And what is the scholarly record? Now, of course, there are organizations who study this. So these organizations, and I'm sure there are more, study this, and they produce a lot of data to give us some idea of how big the scholarly communications industry is, or how many papers are published, and how fast that's growing. But I have a question. Are they, in fact, looking at the moon? Because the moon, of course, has two sides. There's the side that we see from Earth, and there's the invisible far side that, in fact, was impossible to see until about 50 years ago. Now, just for those of you who are not very familiar with the moon, something called tidal lock means that only one side of the moon is visible from Earth. But what's sort of even more interesting is that, in fact, the near side looks very, very different from the far side. It's to do with these dried up lava fields, and I won't go into the detail of it, but just to say that the far side of the moon is very, very different from the near side. And so these organizations, when they're looking at the scholarly communications business, I would posit that they're looking only at the near side because they can't see the far side. So that's really what I want to talk about today is this far side. And I would just sort of add that my introduction to the far side was when I joined the OECD 20 odd years ago, when I left Elsevier and went to the OECD. And I stumbled into a world of publications, research publications, that actually had no connection whatsoever with formal publishing as handled by the likes of Elsevier and Springer and so on. And that, it really opened my eyes to the fact that, yeah, there is a far side out there. And what I'm doing now shows me that this far side is much, much larger than I think I ever imagined. So where's my evidence for this? What's, what can we see that points to the far side? Well, Yale has got a group called Climate Connections, and they're doing a lot of great work in trying to pull content together around climate. And in the lead up to COP, they put out a list of 12 timely reports that they recommend anyone who is following COP should read. And these are these 12 reports. There was one that is published in the scholarly record. It was published in the Lancet. The other 11 were all published informally on various organization websites. Not one of them would have been visible to all those who study the scholarly record. So I think that's a really interesting. So 12 timely reports for COP, and just one is in the scholarly record. The rest are scattered about on the far side. Now, you could ask the question, do they count as scholarship? Is this content trustworthy? Has it been peer reviewed, for example? So, well, let's look at that. Let's look at sort of trust for a minute. these are the organizations that publish those 11 reports. Obviously, you've got the IPCC. I'm imagining that everyone listening today knows who the IPCC are. They produce these great big climate change reports organized by the UN. What's really interesting is all the people who write those reports are academics. They work in academia, and yet the results of their work is published on the IPCC website, not in journals and books. IISD is an NGO based in London. The IEA is an international organization attached, in fact, to the OECD. I know the IEA very well. I used to publish their books. Chatham House is a very well-known think tank based in London. The Sustainability Institute, you've probably never heard of. It's a think tank. It's based in London. It's quite small, and it's just looking at, as the name implies, sustainability issues. The World Meteorological Organization, it's a UN body. UNICEF, which I'm sure you're familiar with, you probably buy their Christmas cards, but they also produce research. And yes, the Yale Program on Climate Change Communications. Now here's interesting. So Yale is publishing on the far side of the moon. They didn't publish their work in a book, as a book or a journal. They published it as a piece of grey literature. America is all in. This is a group of cities and philanthropists and other leaders in the United States who set up this organization when President Trump decided to try and walk away from the Paris Agreement. And they started producing information. The British Academy, which you probably are familiar with, and I'm sure I don't need to explain that that's the logo for the White House. So is this content trustworthy? Well, I think you'd probably agree that those organizations are trustworthy. Has this content been peer reviewed? Well, the answer is yes, it has. Now, it hasn't been peer reviewed in the way that you're familiar with books and journals, but it has gone through an expert review process. There was a study done in 2017 asking these organizations about their reviewing process. And typically these organizations do put their content through an expert review process before it is published. And certainly any organization that I've worked with in this space, I've worked with quite a number of them, they all have pretty robust review processes. And there's a very good reason why they do. Their future funding is totally dependent on their reputation, and their reputation is totally dependent on the quality of the work that they put out. They have as much incentive, if not a greater incentive, than any academic to put their work through review before it goes out, because otherwise they will fail as an organization. So this content is trustworthy, it is reviewed. So begs the question, why is this far side stuff not visible in the scholarly record? Well, that's because the near side stuff is released by publishers. The far side stuff is invariably self-published. And there's a great big gap between those two methods of releasing content. Now, incidentally, near side content is, as Glenn was saying, about 50-50 open and not open. Far side content is invariably open access. And I put open access in inverted commas because it's not open access according to some definitions of open access, but it is all freely available and freely downloadable from their websites. But the trouble is that if it can't be found, it might as well not exist. And this is a big, big problem for content on the far side. It is often really, really hard to find. And I'm going to touch on some of the reasons as to why. Now, the difference is not in the quality of the content, as I've already established with the comments about peer review. The difference is in the quality of what I call the M&M, the metadata and the management systems that are used to wrap around the content and make the content available. So the scholarly record handled by publishers, the quality of the metadata and the management systems that are used is very, very high. On the far side, it's as if the Grinch is hiding all that content because there is no metadata, very, very thin metadata, and they certainly don't use any of the management systems that we're familiar with. So basically, in the scholarly record, all the publishers are supporting and using and exploiting systems produced by all those logos I put up there, and I'm sure there are some more. On the far side, none of those systems are used. And in fact, just as Glenn was saying that scholars don't know very much about open access, when I talk to people on the far side talking about how they publish, they have no idea about DOIs. They have no idea about, locks and clocks or counter reports or MARC records. This is simply a foreign language to them. They have really no idea about it. They might have heard about an ISBN. Some of them use ISBNs, but that's only because they used to sell their books in print. But in all other respects, they are completely ignorant about the whole management infrastructure that we use in scholarly publishing to wrap the content so it can be easily found and it can be easily cited and then preserved into the long run. So it's not really a surprise that the far side stuff often gets lost altogether, and a lot of it ends up with a 404 if you try and access the content. Now, far side stuff is born digital, basically taking advantage of all those Web 2.0 tools that emerged whenever it was, about a decade ago or more. And they're free from all of the constraints of the analog era formats. As a result, they really do use websites and the creativity of digital to put out content in lots of different forms. So yes, there are reports that are great big PDFs, but they also put out videos, they put out blog posts, they put out interactive websites, they put out maps that move. They seem much freer in the way that the research is presented than the formal academic journal book model that's used in the scholarly record. There's a much higher degree of creativity on the far side, at least that's my observation, than I've seen on the more analog era method of publishing that happens on the scholarly publishers. But there's another observation, and that is that far side organizations, they do not use scholarly publishing people to build their websites or manage their publications. So, I mean, I was quite a rare beast to be working at the OECD and having worked previously in a mainstream scholarly publisher. Most of the people who work for people like the British Academy or IPCC or Chatham House or the White House, they do not have scholarly publishing skills, neither from the point of view of having worked in a publisher, nor having worked in a library. They're often communications people or IT people. They don't understand, they don't know, they haven't learned about what it takes to build a website and build content and manage content in such a way that it can be found. So the British Academy website, top of their website, they've got a lovely thing, read, watch, listen. You think, great, that's where I'm going to find their stuff. Well, you'll find all sorts of stuff, but you won't find their reports there because that's not where they put them. And they don't even if you go to the policy and research button, you won't find them. They're really hard to find on the British Academy website. The IPCC website, are you an expert in IPCC jargon? Because if you're not, good luck. Chatham House rebuilt their website about a year ago. It broke every single link to all of their publications, and a fifth of their publications were not put back on their website when they rebuilt it. Why? Because they thought them to be too old. So they just simply left them off. Right? And they're not unusual in that. I know quite a number of other organizations that delete old publications because they are too old. And as for the White House website, the chance of you finding the paper that appeared on that Yale list, good luck, because it took me quite a while to track it down. The key thing here is there are no standards or norms across these websites. If you go to a journal's website built by any scholarly journal, you'll know where you are. You'll understand how the website works very, very quickly because journals are published to a formula. And it's pretty much the same with books. But if you go to these websites from these what I call far-side organizations, every single one is a new journey to try and learn how to find the publications, because there are no standards or norms. Quite a number of them, there is no landing page for a publication. The best you might find is a press release with a link to the PDF file from the press release. It really can be quite a challenge to track down this content. But what's really weird is that the organizations run by publishers and librarians, their websites behave as far-side organizations. So they actually also don't publish their reports using persistent identifiers and using landing pages and all the rest of it. And here are some, here are some examples of organizations and people in our own world who actually don't follow the standards that we see with books and journals when they put out their own research. I just sort of throw that in because I just find it interesting that we work very hard to make the scholarly content that we publish discoverable and safe. We don't do the same with the content that we release ourselves. And even the original Plan S manifesto is no longer on their website. It's gone. If you wanted to do research on that, you wouldn't be able to do that. And the other major problem in this area is broken links. I mentioned Chatham House, but there are so many other examples where links to content just simply disappear. Now, it can disappear either because of poor web management, but it can also disappear when the organization disappears. A lot of the smaller, less well-known NGOs and think tanks, their half-life can be quite short. They can disappear, within a decade of being set up. Usually, one of two reasons: either that whoever was their founder has moved on and the energy has gone, or else their funding dries up. And some of these organizations can be really quite significant. There was a Spanish NGO think tank that was set up in about the year 2000. And by 2010, 2012, they were so significant that they were invited to speak at a G20 meeting. By 2015, they'd gone. The funding dried up, the website's dark, their 2,000 reports no longer available online. That content had just simply evaporated. And that is not uncommon in this space. So how big is this problem? How much content is missing from the scholarly record? Well, with Policy Commons, which is the commons that I'm building at the moment, we've already captured 2.7 million publications from just 7,500 organizations. And that's in less than 2 years. I think we're simply scratching the surface. There are 21,000 organizations in the organization directory we've compiled, which suggests that there's an awful lot more, a long way for us to go to catch their publications. And I just find it sort of kind of interesting that 21,000 number is not a million miles away from the 35,000 journals listed in URIX. It sort of got me thinking that these organizations are almost should be considered as being journals, as in being producers and publishers of content in their own right under a brand, much as a journal is. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's however many millions of articles sitting behind these organizations, but in terms of the number of entities that need to be managed, it's not a million miles away from the number of journals that need to be managed. Now, what I've described is all this far-side content that's very, very poorly managed, published by a set of people who are ignorant about all of the norms that we use in scholarly publishing. And that's really why we've developed our new Commons platform. The idea is to tame this wild far-side stuff and make it part of the scholarly record. And that means that we're looking for reports, we're looking for data sets, we're looking at interactive content, we're looking at blog posts, videos, papers, and yes, articles and books too, because why not? Because we can point to the content even if it's sitting on another website. But also with our other product, Mindscape Commons, we're capturing videos and VR experiences and making those safe and accessible and treating them like the scholarly content that they are. And that's really what we're trying to do with our commons. So behind the scenes, we have spiders that go out that fetch and filter the content, and then we wrap it and tame it with the scholarly metadata and management so that we can begin to inject this content into the mainstream systems. What else are we doing with our commons? Well, we capture organization records. We capture the publications, but we also offer a service whereby you tell us what you need and we'll go and find it for you, retrieve it from websites for you. We'll tag that content automatically as we ingest it. And we'll even extract the tables from the PDFs so that you can not only find the tables more easily, but you can extract the data from the tables and take it away as a CSV file. We allow the community to upload content. There's no way we're going to be able to crawl it all. If people come across publications or links to resources that they think are useful for the community, they can upload it in seconds and make it live on the commons. And of course, we have exports, so we can export to Mark Records and export to Counter and so on. Digging deeper into, this is an item inside Policy Commons. So every item has a summary, author details, if we can find them. A lot of content in this space has no author. So we have to do our best to either replace that with an organization name or we dig in and find the author. We tag it and make it available topics. We create a downloadable citation. This content does not have standardized citations. We're building a tool that will standardize the citations, and we give every object a persistent identifier. We link to the organization record. You're not sure the provenance of this, you can click through to the organization record and you can see that organization. And users can make lists within Policy Commons and then can export those lists, or even add to the list by uploading content so they can add and create a list that could be useful for giving a course or something. And in the search, there's a ton of facets to help you find the far side stuff that you need. So clearly this content, which is incredibly hard to find in any other discovery system, I mean, public search engines really struggle to find this, so like Google and so on. Yes, if you know the title, you'll find it, but if you don't know the title, your chances of finding it are very, very low because these organizations tend not to be very Google friendly and therefore their content gets deprecated. But also this content is not, Google Scholar does not index the organizations, these organizations' website. The Google Scholar can't find it, and their websites aren't set up for Google Scholar to crawl. We're about to make Policy Commons indexable on Google Scholar. We're working with Google Scholar on this so that all this content can be discovered there. So Policy Commons will be a bridge between the far side and Google Scholar. And we're talking to some of the ANI services to see whether we can get the content discoverable in those systems as well. Again, another way of building a bridge between the far side and the near side. So I think that wraps up what we're doing. It's really all about trying to catch all this content. There's really valuable content that's out there that struggles to have an audience, but is in fact really important. And certainly that climate example is just one. We have so many other examples of great content that's sitting on NGO websites, think tank websites, research center websites. I mean, research centers that have grown up like mushrooms or within universities. There's a huge amount of content sitting on those websites that has not made its way into journals and books. And there's a long way to go to make that content part of the scholarly record. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Toby. Couple questions for you. One is sort of related to a comment that was put in here from someone who mentions that they had previously worked in this NGO space. In far side space is how they define it. Are you working with those organizations to enhance their content at the point of production, or are you enriching it after the fact?
After the fact. There's no realistic way of working with them upstream. I mean, first of all, we are currently harvesting content from 7,500 organizations. Coherent Digital is a startup. There aren't very many of us. So the idea that we're going to be able to work upstream, no, that's not how it's going to work. So no, what we're trying to do is if you like, reverse engineer the content so that we can begin to extract the value. So for example, with that table tool, that's something that we have a tool that goes in, tries to find tables, pulls it out,
Sure.
turns it into a CSV file.
Okay. So you're solving the problem after the problem's been created. You're not trying to fix the problem from the outset.
Well, I have to say, I spend some of my time trying to advise organizations on how they might want to upgrade their publishing, but that's really hard. In fact, to get organizations to change the way that they publish is really hard, because there's all sorts of reasons of why they publish the way that they publish. So yeah.
No, absolutely. Changing production workflow is not an easy thing, and especially when you're talking about digital production, digital content creation is such a, I could design a 24-page brochure on my laptop without having any understanding of traditional publishing processes or metadata or any of those things, and just create a PDF and post it to a website. Question for you though, I presume you're crawling this, do you get rights to do this? Are you, is there a presumption that it's available and are you providing access to the content, or are you just providing the metadata associated with it?
Well, before we crawl any of the organizations, we write to them to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. If you have any objection, let us know, and we won't crawl you. I have to say, no one said no so far. So that's, so we do write. We don't seek formal rights. I think goes back to the point about these organizations not employing people from the publishing library world. Just as they don't know what a DOI is, they don't really understand what rights are. And so even if we were to try to have that conversation, I think it would be very, very long and very slow. The other thing is these organizations are actually really keen that their content is read, and therefore they're really excited by the idea that we're going to make their content more discoverable. So what we do is that when we crawl, we ingest the metadata as best as we can find it, we enhance it, we enrich it, we ingest the file as well, so that it can inform our search engine, which is a full text search engine. And then the user finds the item in Policy Commons, and we route them back to the original website to fetch the content. Now we do that for a couple of reasons. One is, yes, okay, it's good for rights, but the other thing is, I think it's really useful for the user to see the content in its original context. There may be associated items that we haven't got that could be relevant for them and useful for them, and they can learn more about that organization. So the main thing we do is route people back to the original website. However, if that link breaks, because remember, this content is very unstable, then we've got a copy of that item, and then those who are members we will give access to the saved copy. Now, we don't attempt to sell that. It's a service. We're providing you with a service whereby is like a link insurance service. If the copyright owner asks us to take down the content, obviously we take it down. We do also have some premium content. There are some people in this space who are still selling. We are licensing that content in the normal traditional way and making that available inside Policy Commons as well. But that's a small subset of our content.
So are you assigning DOIs to this content?
We'd love to assign DOIs, but we can't afford to. So we've developed our own persistent identifier, but it's compatible with a DOI system. But I mean, 2.7 million objects, that would be quite a big cost for a startup.
We should talk. Toby, I have so many more questions. I could keep going, but I understand we are also out of time. So congratulations. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is really fascinating work. And I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about some of the things that you're doing here in the space. Thank you, Toby.
No problem. Thank you very much.